in
Picture
advance.
a Tuesday morning in September
Thomas Brown.
1974.
Present,
You're
miss.
6 years old.
Susan Clark.
Classroom
Yes,
smells
miss.
of poster paint and damp plimsolls. The teacher calls the register, and the same names echo back, one after another, like a kind of music you've completely forgotten. There was a
David
time
Brown?
in Britain
Yes,
when you
miss.
could walk into
Sarah
almost
Clark?
any primary school
Right, son,
classroom
keep up.
from Carlisle
Not far
to
now, love.
Cornwall, from the valleys to the Vale of York, and hear the same 15 names read aloud before 9 o'clock. These weren't just names. They were a kind of social shorthand, a signal that you belonged to your era, your street, your generation. By the early 1970s, Britain's registry offices were recording births at over 700,000 a year. And certain names dominated
Gary?
those records
Yes,
with
sir.
extraordinary consistency.
Gary?
Sharon, Trevor, Linda, Gary, Beverley. Names that once felt as natural and inevitable as tea at 4:30 and Top of the Pops on a Thursday evening. Today, those names have almost vanished from primary schools entirely. A child born in 2010 named Gary would be remarkable. A child born in 1968 named Gary was simply Tuesday. This is the story of 15 names that once filled every classroom register in Britain. Names that carried whole worlds inside them. And names that are quietly, gently, almost heartbreakingly gone. Name 1. Sharon. Say
Sharon.
it aloud.
Yes, miss.
Sharon.
There's
Present,
something
miss.
immediate
Sharon.
about
Here,
it.
miss.
A short,
Sharon.
Miss.
bright vowel. A name that sounds like it's already heading somewhere. In 1965, Sharon was the third most popular girl's name in England and Wales. Millions of little Sharons were born throughout the late 1950s and 1960s, and by the early 1970s, they were filling junior schools from Wolverhampton to Wigan. Sharon Davis. Sharon Osbourne before she was Sharon Osbourne. The name carried a kind of working-class confidence about it. It didn't apologise for itself. Ask anyone who grew up in that era and they'll tell you. There were 3 Sharons in their class, possibly 4. Now there are almost none. The name has virtually disappeared from British birth registers since the mid-1990s, gone in a single generation. Name 2, Trevor. Trevor was the boy at the back with scuffed shoes and a chute. Magazine rolled into his back pocket. In 1960, Trevor sat comfortably in the top 20 most popular boys' names in Britain. It was a name that felt solid, dependable, slightly sporty. Trevor Francis became the first British footballer to be transferred for $1 million.
Today, we'll
in
discuss the
February
world's major rivers.
1979.
Let's begin with the
A
Nile
moment
and
that
Amazon.
felt as monumental as a moon landing to every boy called Trevor in the country. That month alone, there were thousands of them watching the television with a particular flush of pride. But the decline was swift and merciless. By 2000, fewer than 200 boys a year were being named Trevor in England and Wales. By 2015, the number had fallen below 50. Trevor has nearly left the building. Name 3, Linda. Linda was the name of 1 million mothers. In 1954, it was the most popular girl's name in Britain. The most popular, not second. First. And it held extraordinary sway throughout the late 1950s and into the 1960s, meaning that by the time those Lindas were giving birth to their own children in the 1970s and 80s, entire streets were filled with women sharing the name. Think of Linda McCartney. Think of the Linda you knew growing up, perhaps your auntie, your neighbour, your mum's friend, who always smelled of almost famous hairspray and silk cut. Linda was warm. Linda made you a sandwich. Linda had Coronation Street on in the background. The name
Right,
feels
sandwiches
like a
coming up.
kitchen.
Can I have
And that's
ham,
not a small
please?
thing.
Of course,
Name
love.
4,
Mum, what's
Gary.
on telly?
Nobody named Gary has ever been described as mysterious. Gary is dependable. Gary watches the football. Gary has strong opinions about Marmite. In 1969, Gary was the 4th most popular boy's name in Britain. Gary Lineker.
Hunter
Gary
whips in
Barlow,
the cross, a
Gary
lovely
Neville.
ball.
An
Oh,
entire
he's missed it by
generation of
inches.
British cultural
What a
life.
chance for the Reds.
Sport, music, television, has been quietly powered by Garris. The name peaked in the early 1970s. In 1975, an estimated 1 in every 25 baby boys born in England was named Gary. 1 in 25. Walk into any room of 25 men born in that decade, and statistically, there's a Gary in there somewhere, probably wearing a sensible jacket and knowing exactly where the nearest chippy is. Name 5. Beverley. Beverley was the name that felt slightly glamorous compared to the others. It had an extra syllable. It suggested sophistication, a girl who might one day appear on 3-2-1 or win something on Bullseye. Throughout the 1960s, Beverley was reliably popular across British classrooms, peaking around 1964. Beverley Sisters. Beverley Callard, who became a fixture in Coronation Street decades later. The name carried a sense of ambition contained within northern England, a reaching for something slightly brighter. And then it simply stopped. Not abruptly, but quietly, like a shop that gradually reduces its opening hours before one day the shutters just stay down. Name 6. Kevin. Kevin. There's a whole emotional history in that name. In 1962, Kevin was the 8th most popular name for boys in Britain. Working class, funny, never quite taken seriously by people who should have known better.
Yes, miss.
Beverley?
Kevin
Keegan
Present, miss.
lifted British
Beverley?
football
Here,
in the
miss.
1970s and early 1980s with a fervour that felt personal to every Kevin in the country. And there were hundreds of thousands of them. School registers in Bradford, Bristol, Belfast, Birmingham.
Kevin.
Kevin
Yes,
after Kevin
miss.
after Kevin.
We have
By
several
2020,
Kevins today.
Kevin had become what statisticians politely call a generational name. A name frozen in amber. A name that tells you immediately, almost to the decade, exactly when someone was born. Name 7. Tracey. Tracey was the name of your mate's older sister. She had feathered hair and a cassette of Grease she'd taped off the radio. In 1970, Tracey ranked among the top 5 most popular names for girls in England and Wales. 5. In a country where girls were also being named Emma and Claire and Julie, Tracey held its own with remarkable force. Margaret Tracey, a dinner lady in Derby, who worked the same school canteen from 1971 to 1998.
Right, attendance. Kevin?
Once described the peak years as feeling
3
like
of
a
you.
hall
Right.
of mirrors.
Next, Stephen.
Every table had a Tracey, and they all answered at once. That was real. That was the school lunch of a generation. The name began its steep decline in the early 1980s. By 1990, it had already faded significantly. By 2005, it had nearly vanished. But if you say Tracey to anyone who grew up between 1965 and 1985, their face changes. Something comes back. Name 8. Darren. Darren arrived in Britain partly through American television. It was modern. It felt like a name from a programme. In 1968, Darren cracked
Diane?
the top 20
Present,
for boys'
miss.
names.
That would be Diane
It
K.
carried a
Present,
slightly
miss.
rebellious
Diane
edge,
M.
a name for a boy who might one day own a motorbike, or at least strongly consider it. Darren Day. Darren Gough, who bowled with such joy during England's cricket summers in the 1990s that it felt like the whole country exhaled whenever he ran in. Darren was the name of a generation that watched Only Fools and Horses when it first aired in 1981 and thought Del Boy was magnificent. Name 9. Diane. Diane was slightly more refined. It suggested a girl who read books and kept them tidy. Throughout the 1960s,
Get in there.
Diane was a top 20 name for girls in Britain. Diane Keeley, born in Stockport in 1961, remembers her first day of school in 1966. 5 girls in her class of 30 were named Diane. The teacher, she said, called us Diane K and Diane M and Diane the Tall One. We didn't mind. It felt like being part of something, that feeling of being part of something. That's what these names gave people. Name 10, Wayne. Wayne entered British naming culture like a striker arriving late into the box. It was American in origin, carrying the shadow of John Wayne across the Atlantic, but by 1970 it was thoroughly, unmistakably British. Working class, proud, entirely unpretentious. In 1972, Wayne was one of the top 15 boys' names in England and Wales. Wayne Sleep, the dancer. Wayne Rooney, though born in 1985, he caught the very tail of the Wayne era. The name has a physical quality, short, strong, one syllable, no nonsense. It didn't ask permission, it simply arrived. Name 11, Deborah. Deborah was the name that suggested a girl with good handwriting, careful, considered. In 1960, Deborah was the third most popular girl's name in Britain. It sat comfortably alongside Susan and Patricia, names that belonged to a post-war generation finding its feet, reaching for stability, choosing names that sounded as though...
Come on, you lions!
Yes, in the 1970s. Deborah Meaden became a face of business television decades later. But by the 1990s, Deborah had retreated entirely into the generation that held it first. Name 12, Brian. Brian. There were Brians everywhere. In 1954, Brian was one of the 5 most popular boys' names in Britain. Brian Clough managed Nottingham Forest to 2 consecutive European Cup victories in 1979 and 1980. 2 years that made every Brian in England stand slightly taller. Brian May was coaxing impossible sounds from a guitar he'd built himself. Brian was dependable in the way that a good coal fire is dependable. Solid. Always there. Warming the whole room without drawing attention to itself. Name 13. Sandra. Sandra was the name of someone who knew what she was doing. In 1957, it was among the top 3 girls' names in England and Wales. Sandra filled post-war Britain with quiet competence, at the counter of the chemist.
There you are, love. Fresh today.
Cheers, Sandra. Looks grand.
That's 50 pence, please. Got any more of them apples?
Knowing exactly which child belonged to which class without checking a list. Sandra Dickinson. Sandra, from Birds of a Feather, which drew 17 million viewers in its peak years. Nearly a third of the entire country sitting down together to watch. Name 14, Derek. Derek was the name your dad's friend had. He drove a Cortina and knew about guttering. In 1950, Derek was genuinely fashionable, a top 10 name for boys in Britain. Derek Jacobi gave it theatrical weight. Derek Trotter, Del Boy's actual name, gave it comedy and warmth, and something almost tender. By 1980, the decline was visible. By 2000, Derek was firmly a name of the past. But here's the thing. Every Derek you've ever met has been decent. Not one of them has ever let you down. That counts for something. Name 15, Susan. And then there's Susan. Simple, steady, ubiquitous Susan. In 1955, Susan was the single most popular girl's name in the entire country. The most popular name. The whole country was naming its daughters Susan. Susan Hill, the novelist. Susan Hampshire, who appeared on the Forsyte Saga in 1967, when 18 million people watched each episode, gathered around single television sets in sitting rooms still papered with post-war wallpaper, in houses still warmed by single fires. Susan was Britain at its most earnest and hopeful. It was the name of a country rebuilding itself, choosing something plain and strong and good, something that sounded like it would last. And for a while it did. These 15 names, Sharon and Trevor, Linda and Gary, Beverley and Kevin, Tracey and Darren, Diane and Wayne, Deborah and Brian, Sandra and Derek and Susan, they don't appear much on school registers anymore. They belong to a Britain that has quietly, completely transformed. We had less back then. Fewer choices, fewer channels, fewer options for everything, including what you named your child. But somehow that shared smallness felt like more. It felt like belonging. 3 Sharons in one classroom wasn't a problem. It was evidence that you were all from the same place, the same time, the same something. If you were one of these names, or if you grew up sitting next to one of them, you know exactly what I mean. You can hear the register being called. You can smell the floor polish and the powder paint. You can feel the weight of a wooden chair beneath you and the September cold coming through a window that never quite closed properly. That world is gone, but it was real, and it mattered. If this brought back memories, share it with someone who remembers. Please subscribe to keep these stories alive. And drop a comment below. What was the most common name in your classroom? We'd love to know.